thanks for having me out tonight, guys, and thanks for being here too. I usually don't like to get out and about too much in the winter, so it's brilliant to see everybody here. As Echo stated, I'm functional medicine trained, which essentially is looking at cause of illness. I'm also a medical scientist, and my specialty is in neuroscience. We're going to talk a lot about the brain and how the brain plays a role in how we perceive and how we react to symptoms, to biotoxins from Lyme, to Lyme itself, to co-infections and that sort of thing. So I titled Lyme-related complex trauma. Okay, for anybody, if I assume most of you are being affected by that, that's why you're here, or someone close to you is, it actually creates trauma in the brain when we lose function, okay? Or when we develop chronic pain. It's a very common symptom, as we know. So disclosures, really don't have too much to disclose. I'm a founding partner of Neurvana Health, and so we do have 3 clinics. And yeah, that's about all I have for disclosures. I always like to start with my story because I have a really close personal experience with Lyme. That was me back in high school, perfectly normal, cognitive.
I don't know if I'd call
emotionally healthy.
Just
I've never
joking.
been normal, I guess.
Just easy.
I've always been really social, and that lasted until about 2011. I started to get a handful of issues from what I'm pretty sure were old head injuries that I've determined now. And in 2011, I went for a backpacking trip down in Nicaragua, and I got a nymph on the middle of my chest. And I didn't know much about anything tick-related back then, so I kind of just scratched it out and went on. About a week later, I got extremely sick with what they diagnosed me as dengue fever. I think you guys have heard of dengue fever. It's a little similar to malaria, but it's a virus. It's caused by a virus. And they said, yeah, we'll hook you up with some IVs, you'll get better. That was while I was in Nicaragua. Of course, they didn't confirm it through testing. They just said, well, you have all the symptoms of it, right? Extreme pain. They call it breakback fever. So I was in a ton of pain. I was vomiting, diarrhea. Probably the sickest I've ever been. I remember almost hallucinating at times. And I never really bounced back. It was about a year later, and I was struggling with depression. I was struggling with anxiety. I was having panic attacks every day. I was having pain everywhere. Doctors couldn't diagnose me with anything, so they did, but it was symptom-based diagnoses, right? Chronic fatigue syndrome, fibromyalgia, depression, here's this drug, here's that drug. So I was in medical science, and thankfully, I was able to push through. It wasn't easy. And what I found through, I was trained in research, so it was the only thing I knew how to do was research my way out of this thing. So this is kind of some research that I landed on. Top 10 prescribed drugs in the United States, okay, in 2010. And so I call it conventional medicine effectiveness because it really should be titled lack of effectiveness. The little humans that you see underneath of the drug names up here are the number needed to treat to get therapeutic effect. So we see some of them are quite poor. We have 21 people needed to treat before one person gets therapeutic effect. The best drugs are performing at 25%. So we need to treat 4 people for one person to get therapeutic effect. I don't know if you guys have ever seen the placebo effect studies, but for the most part, you're between 20 and 25% on average. So 100 plus years of medical science research, and our top 10 drugs are not outperforming placebo. Not very good, in my opinion. And so we keep doing this same thing, where we try to develop a drug, we try to develop a vaccine, insanity, definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. And we end up stuck in a vicious circle. So over time, I've tried all sorts of different modalities, and I've seen things that have worked and haven't worked. And over time, I've been able to develop a method that we call drinking from the fire hose, if anyone's ever heard me speak, that really starts addressing things on levels, okay? And the first level always starts with our environment. So one thing that I've also learned through going through my issues has been that Lyme hasn't been the only factor for me. And some of you might have maybe noticed that as well. If I look hard enough doing ultrasound-provoked PCR testing and that sort of thing, I can find Lyme in a lot of people. And I find it in a lot of people that aren't even symptomatic, really, of Lyme, right? And so that really sparked my curiosity. It's like, okay, what's going on here? And we know, like, we found frozen human cadavers from thousands of years ago that have spirochete, that has ancient Borrelia DNA in it. So we've dealt with this for a long time. So what gives? What's the deal? Why are so many people? I always look at our environment. Okay, what's changed? What's changed in our culture? Well, our environment's more toxic than it's ever been, right? And now, and one of the things I got you guys to do was shut your phones on airplane mode. The National Institute of Health just released their toxicology reports on EMF radiation. 3G, 4G, LTE, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth. And what they found wasn't very good. So there's a lot of documented neuropsychiatric effects from EMFs. And the big problem with EMS when it comes to Lyme, and another thing that I've become quite versed in is mold as well, mold toxicity. They tend to come hand in hand. We call it chronic inflammatory response syndrome. So what we found now is when there's high density radio frequencies, which is what your devices are when they're connected to a network, actually trigger a cell danger response in infections. It causes them to release massive amounts of biotoxins. It's happening in our environment, and it's happening in our bodies if we have these, okay? And that's another thing that we've really noticed what's changed over the last few decades. We didn't even have these things in the early 90s, right? I remember I didn't have my first phone until 2008. And 10 years later, we amped up the power density of these 1,000 times in 10 years. And we did a 17-year study. Results just got released to the public in the start of November. And so we like to do this as a culture, is we do things and then we ask questions later. And so now we're looking at launching 5G, which is another actually 100-fold increase in power density, and it's a waveform that we've never seen on the planet. So there is a lot of solutions, and we're going to be running a full EMF event in January or February. So if you guys follow us, you'll see the details on that. Yeah. Just a lot of solutions and things that you can do. Simple things like, shutting your Wi-Fi off, unplugging your Wi-Fi at night, keeping your phone on airplane mode, don't keep it in your room while you sleep, those sorts of things, because you can get a danger response triggered.
So that'll be on your Facebook page?
We'll be posting all about that, our email list and everything. And so what I found through creating this pyramid is we have these different levels of healing. And so we have our environment, right? What's around us? What are we breathing in? What are we drinking? What are we eating? What's in our gut? Because our gut actually technically is not a part of our internal body. It's, I don't know if you guys have ever thought of this, but we're like a donut with a big hole through the middle. Yeah. So any issues within the gut will contribute to health issues. And one thing that I found when I was going through all my issues was I tried probably every Lyme treatment that I was able to find, whether it had any evidence or not. And it was never sufficient enough for me. And so what I always learned in medical science was the diagnosis has to facilitate the treatment, and if the treatment doesn't work, then you have a differential diagnosis. There's got to be something else going on or something more contributing, and we thankfully have nice access to technology that shows us what's going on. This is what we're going to be talking a lot about today, guys. It's the emotional limbic system, and there's a reason that this system is higher up on the scale. Okay, it has a stronger effect, and I'm going to teach you guys as to why it has a stronger effect than things like our biochemistry, things like our hormones, and things like our immune system, or that which challenges our immune system. We have beliefs, and we have values, and we have stories that our brain creates unconsciously before we even recognize it to explain our situation. And we need to be able to break through those beliefs so that we can connect to our true values. Because if we don't, we make all our decisions out of fear. And that fear is a maladaptive response. We don't want to be making decisions out of fear. And then what I've also found is being able to connect with your purpose requires you to have a lot of these balance, and if you can do that, you can actually break through. And I can safely say I've been through this. I've taken a lot of other people through this, and I'm 95% back. And there's odd little bumps that I get, and they're very minor. They hardly affect my day to day. So you can break through this, and this is a concept called epigenetics, and I think most people who deal with Lyme are fairly educated. I'd say more than the average person. You guys may have heard of epigenetics. We used to think that we were doomed and we were a product of our genetics, right? My dad had gout, so I'm doomed to get gout, right? Or my mom had anxiety, so I'm doomed to get anxiety. We've pretty much completely debunked that. We have genetic weaknesses, and so what I should have had down here is our genetics are the foundation that all this builds on top of. And depending what's going on in the pyramid, it's going to affect how our genes are expressed. And the best way to depict that for you guys is a caterpillar will turn into a butterfly, and its DNA never changes. Okay? The way that it does that is it changes what genes are turned on and what genes are turned off. And all of the environmental issues, the EMS, hormonal infection issues, emotional issues, limbic issues, trauma, it will all affect what genes are turned on and off in our body. Of course, we don't grow wings and fly. It's incredible. But what we do is express disease states if we get poor epigenetic expression, or we age faster than we should, right? We get neurodegeneration, cancers, things like that. Right? When we have healthy epigenetic expression, we live relatively symptom-free. So I just want to define trauma, because it's a very important topic. It's any stimuli considered to be physical, emotional, mental, cultural, or even spiritual that forces the brain to have to dissociate or fragment in order to cope. Okay? Dissociation can look different. It can look at like the creation of a story. For me, it was social disengagement. I isolated myself. I couldn't engage with social reality. Didn't have the energy. This response can become stuck on. And I'm going to talk to you guys about a concept called neurotags, about what happens in the brain when that gets stuck on, and the other issues that happen downstream. Actually, I'm going to skip through this slide. So downstream effects of emotional trauma, vagal nerve dysfunction. How many of you guys know what vagal nerve is? Cool. Okay, for those of you who don't know what it is, it comes from our brainstem. It runs down the left side of our neck. You guys ever got a shiver before? That's the vagal nerve triggering. It goes down and it goes under our diaphragm. So when we breathe deep, we'll actually stimulate the vagus nerve and our heart rate drops. It innervates on our liver, our kidneys, our bladder, our pancreas, our gut. And the biggest symptom of vagal nerve dysfunction is our gut doesn't move things well anymore. So now we get dysbiosis, we get candida, we get bacterial overgrowth. But really that's all a symptom of things not moving well through the gut. And that's probably the number one thing that happens, whether it's physical or emotional, vagal nerve dysfunction. Something called persistent cytokine syndrome, fancy way to say an inflammatory response gets stuck on, and it just doesn't quite shut off. Gut motility, so that again is due to vagal nerve. Hormonal dysregulation. The problem with the hormone dysregulation that comes from this is it happens at the level of the brain. So it's hard, in my experience, impossible to balance hormones like steroid hormones and sex hormones without working with the brain, because the brain is affecting that hormone imbalance. Immune dysfunction, and I'm actually just working on publishing some literature, and no, I'm not the only one who thinks this, that Borrelia and Lyme infections are actually dysbiotic, which means that most of us have them, and there's reasons that they're activated. There's other things going on that are allowing them to trigger, which is amazing, because it gives us hope to actually be able to do something about it, right? If there's people walking around with it that are healthy, then why can't we, right?
Yeah.
Neurotransmitter receptor internalization, fancy way to say molecules that help send signals in the brain start dysfunctioning, so we get memory issues, focus issues, depression, anxiety, right? All of that. All the symptoms you've seen with
Corey, do you want all our questions at the end, or can we ask
Ask as we go. Yeah, I want this as organic as it can be, yeah.
Okay, so that last slide, something that strikes me, not that men don't get Lyme, but like MS and chronic fatigue, there's an overrepresentation of women affected. Yeah. So does that have a lot to do? I know women on average have lower serotonin, which makes us more prone. Is the sort of the hormones that women experience, is that one of the reasons why there is an overrepresentation?
Great question.
Just looking at the end there.
Great question.
Yeah,
I'm actually going to skip to this.
Okay.
Because there's a few reasons why women are more prone. First of all, your guys' hormones fluctuate a lot. Which is stressful. It's creating a stress. And so actually I like this slide because what this shows is we have all our clinical conditions and our symptoms down here, right? This is what we see on the surface. This is what we feel. But up here I like to depict this as a tank, right? And we're in Alberta, so I'll call it an oil tank. Even though oil's in a sad state right now. So the more that we get stressors filling up in here, and the closer we get to the brim here, the more likely we're going to start triggering the sympathetic system. We get hormone dysregulation, we get immune dysregulation, we get energy dysregulation, and then we get our symptoms, right? So you're adding pregnancies, you're adding, women arguably have more cultural stress as well. And then you're also adding hormone fluctuations that are happening every month. So your women's ants tend to be more full than men's as well. And then there are some genetic weaknesses based on the fact that a lot of representation from X chromosomes versus Y chromosomes changes the scenario too. So again, it's not that it's a genetic excuse or anything like that, but this tends to be more stressors within a female system, especially as you get older. So what we're going to talk a lot about today is the trauma and some of the emotions and how they get stuck on, create the issues, and then we see the symptoms on the surface. So this is something that we test everybody in our clinic. It's called heart rate variability. Okay. Our ability to regulate our heart rate is the ability for us to regulate our nervous system, which increases our prognosis or our outcome. And so this is kind of what you want to see. As somebody breathes in, their heart rate goes up and then goes down. And there's a good amount of variation there. There's not too much variation. The heart rate's balanced. You'll see the peak heart rate here is coming down, right? That's what we should see. The heart rate calms down as we breathe, right? For other people, does that. This is called dysautonomia. You don't see this on an ECG. You only see it if you're on a heart rate variability. So your heart does weird things, but you go into the doctor and it's like, no, it looks good.
You're
right?
fine. Yeah. We have a lot of people in the group with that experience the palpitations, and they go in, it's fine, yeah,
always
anxiety,
fine.
it's always something,
Always,
right?
Yeah. And then because we're so limited in the tools we have in conventional medicine, what we do is we go, well, you don't fit our criteria, so it's in your head. Get out of my office.
Mm-hmm.
So this is dysautonomia. So you'll see like there's times when this person's heart's going up to about 110 beats per minute, and the very next second it's at 30, right? So first of all, huge amounts of fatigue because our heart rate's up, and anxiety because our brain's like, what is going on here, right? EMFs affect this a lot too. So I always tell when I'm being overexposed to EMFs because my heart goes weird. So that's like, right away I'm driving in my vehicle and my heart starts going weird, I'll check my phone and I'm like, forgot to turn on airplane mode. So this is huge in POTS syndrome. Anyone? Yeah. Postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome. You stand up, your blood pressure goes low, some people faint. Syncope we call it, right? Very common. And this is actually when we work at the level of the brain, because no matter what we're dealing with, we can train the brain to be okay with what it's dealing with. The problem is when it freaks out and it goes into danger mode. I'm going to talk about how that happens. But this is the same person 2 weeks apart, just doing some training with heart rate variability and doing some training within the nervous system. So still having one spike, but way better. You start being able to regulate it yourself, which is really empowering when you can control it yourself. And this is why it happens. Okay? For those of you who don't know Stephen Porges, I highly recommend looking him up and going and looking at his videos. Anybody with any type of trauma, any type of loss of function, definitely needs to look this up. What we want to do when we have healthy heart rate variability, like I was showing you, is we're actually moving in and out of the fight or flight, and then into what we call the rest and digest. And we also call this social engagement. When we're in that, we can engage socially. And there's a healthy amount of what we call internalization, where we go into our brain and we go, okay, how's this person responding to what I'm saying, right? Are you guys throwing things at me? You're probably going to want to change what I'm saying, right? And then we go and re-engage. And then we go back into internal. And it's very important. We put a bad rap on the fight or flight system. But we're dead without it. We can't deliver oxygen. We can't modulate our blood pressure. We can't modulate our glucose uptake. We're dead. So we need to bounce in and out of that system. But what happens when we get a chronic stressor is we actually move into the fight or flight and we don't come back down into the social engagement. If it's happening towards the front of our brain, we get rage, anger, irritability, agitation, frustration. If it's happening in the back part, we get avoidance or flight, panic, fear, anxiety, worry, concern, mobilization. And people's muscles will tighten up to mobilize. And then we move up into this nasty one, which is where I ended up. The dorsal vagal. Complete social disengagement. And for a lot of us, we'll actually bounce here before we fully move into there, and we bounce between feeling hopeless and helpless, depressed, right? And then we'll feel okay and we'll feel anxious and we'll be able to engage a bit, and then all of a sudden we're depressed and we're hopeless and we're low again. And the biggest one here is preparation for death. Okay, this is where my journey almost ended. This is the brain prepare. It's literally this emotional system of the brain thinks that we're dying when we get up there. It's trying to remove us away. It's trying to get us to go bed down. How many people, guys, there's a lot of guys in here, just great. How many guys hunt? Yeah, I heard you talking about hunting back there. What happens when an animal's wounded? Goes in, it beds down, right? That's what our brain is trying to get us to do, is bed down and hopefully we heal, right? And we don't bring any predators back to the pack. So where I ended up was preparation for death. What's the point? What's the point of being here anymore? I couldn't engage socially. It was, what's the point? I may as well just take care of it, right? And you start becoming okay with that. We call suicidal ideations. And then there's a very close step to where some people actually will attempt or will commit suicide because they're so deep in that. But it's a symptom. It's not a failing of character. It's important for people to know. It's not a failing of character. It is literally a built-in survival system that we cannot override consciously. So it's like telling somebody to stop an adrenaline reaction when they're in a car accident. Not going to happen, right? So there's a lot of great strategies out there. If that is what's happening, it's important to get the diagnosis, because if you just treat Lyme directly and you're dealing with that, you're not going to get very far. You're usually just going to get a massive hurts. The body's already in this reactivity state. So we use something called the Quantitative Eeg, and this is the funny little hat that we put on people. And it's literally an EEG. So most of the time when you see an EEG, you see little sensors and electrodes all over with wires running. Well, that became inefficient after a while. So we ended up creating this system. And what it shows us is function, which is really important because 50 years ago, we used to think that if we could look at a physical view of the brain, it was enough to tell us function. Well, we, for 40 years, have known that structure does not determine function in the brain. We don't have a way to look at the 100 billion neurons separately that we have in our brain. So we'll look at an MRI or a CT and we go, oh no, everything looks okay. Right? And again, anyone with neurological presentation of Lyme will know this. Right? Oh, it looks good. It looks good. Right? You look at a functional analysis and it's going to look something like that. Color is not good.
Okay.
We want it to be white. Sorry, I should have said that. This is good. No lines, that's good. That is not. So when we see this, we know there's massive neuroinflammatory patterns going on. And I've seen some major ones like this not show anything on a CT or an MRI. Unless we sent it down and quantified the MRI down in the States, we couldn't see it. It looked normal. Right?
And is this all recognized in the medical field?
No, it depends who you talk to.
Okay.
Yeah. it's recognized heavily in the research, but we're 20 to 60 years behind integrating any good research into conventional medicine. So this is something where you can actually start looking, and we've seen like kind of what I was talking in that pyramid at the start. That's kind of where we see people fall into, and some unlucky people happen to fall into multiple categories, which makes it that much more tricky because if you're only targeting one level, you're going to get improvement in some symptoms, some people worsen in others, and it's tough without looking at it holistically. And I'm going to talk a lot about level 3 or level 3/4 is the limbic brain. I call it the child brain. Okay? Anytime we feel emotional, it's the child brain. Okay? It's not us, it's not our adult brain, it's the child brain. And unfortunately, this area right down here, the little blue one, amygdaloid body or amygdala, literally means almond in Latin. So if you ever forget the name, just call it almond in Latin. This holds all of our intrinsic and implicit memories. It's starting to form while we're in our mom's womb, 3rd trimester. So mom has trauma while she's pregnant, guess what? You're going to adopt it. And then it has this little area called the cingulate, which is the green part, and this is how it hijacks our cortex. Again, very important for survival, because if we find ourselves in a situation, we can't spend time trying to reason, what should I do here? We just need to run or fight, right? So it's really important, but what happens when you have trauma is the response sticks on, and this is what it looks like for somebody in a brain map when the response sticks on. For this person, it's what we call this limbic hijacking or emotional hijacking of the frontal lobe. So executive functions drop, organization, motivation, mood, regulation, focus, attention, memory retrieval, working memory. You can see all the symptoms start adding up.
What if you become emotionless?
It'll go blue, and then you're prone to physical pain because you're actually emotionally dissociating. And there's much different treatments for this one, but there are treatments. But the problem is, higher level can't be treated biochemically, which is why medications have failed PTSD miserably. Now, this is why we're interested when we're dealing with Lyme or co-infections. When the amygdala activates, again, it can activate the viral, bacterial, and inflammatory triggers. The only way you'll be able to tell if that's happening is through acute EEG. Acute psychological stress, of course, previous traumas, of course. Immune dysfunction is the main symptom that happens here. So our immune system's like a 3-legged stool. If any area or division of the immune system becomes too long or too short, what happens? We fall off the stool, right? So when we get amygdala activation, it's different for everybody, and it depends what's going on, but some people go way too strong into the antibody-mediated, and they get all the histamine symptoms, all the allergies, all the sensitivities, the hives. Some people, they literally can't even sit in their own skin because their eczema's so bad, it's cracking and bleeding. I remember we worked with a 1.5-year-old baby when I was getting trained at the first clinic I worked at, and he would bleed into his bed sheets. His skin was so bad. And he had an antibody-mediated response due to Lyme. Cell-mediated response tends to cause autoimmunity. And then the really nasty one is when our innate immune system activates. The innate immune system is the flamethrower of the immune system. All it knows how to do is start things on fire. So if the problem if that happens is you'll never see it on blood work. You'll never pick up an antibody. You'll have all the symptoms of autoimmunity, but it won't be there. You'll have symptoms of rheumatoid arthritis, but you won't flag one rheumatoid factor. And we have tests for it, but Alberta Health doesn't use them because they're too expensive. And one of them is a marker called MMP9. It breaks down our extracellular matrix so that the skeleton holds all our cells together. And most importantly, it's what's important for our blood-brain barrier, right? So things aren't getting in there, and the immune system's not getting into our nervous system where it shouldn't be. And it's also big for the gut, right? The leaky gut permeability. Most of you have probably heard that. Is when our gut junctions start opening up and inflammation just keeps piling up. So with MMP9, it's really important if you have elevations you have to use incredibly high dose fish oil, and you need to make sure you're not overexposed to EMFs, like from your phone and your Wi-Fi, because it will elevate. That's the only blood marker we've been able to find that's related to EMF exposure is that MMP9. And again, it's a vicious circle because we start getting symptoms from this, and then our brain freaks out because we're having symptoms, and it just keeps activating.
That adrenal exhaustion at the bottom.
Right, and then we have secondary illness that if the circle goes long enough, your adrenals are depleted, and it's important for survival. When you go into a true, there's 8 states of adrenal exhaustion or adrenal fatigue, and when you get into those deeper ones, you're going into that dorsal vagal where you're exhausted, hopeless, helpless, right? But there's ways to pull out of it. This is another great way that we can actually diagnose if there's trauma going on, which again, oftentimes with any chronic illness, you're dealing with trauma because you've dealt with a chronic loss of function that you haven't been able to fix. It's scary. It really is. I remember going through my crap, and I was scared, right? Like, I didn't know what was going on with me. Doctors didn't know what was going on with me. I wasn't sure where I was going to end up. These networks here, pleasure, salience, frontal, limbic. So these 2 networks, I don't ignore those, the schizophrenia and working memory. But the pleasure, salience, and frontal limbic are formed very early in life. They're actually some of the first networks that are formed. The salience network is intact when an infant is mimicking mom or dad, right? Anyone have kids in here? You know the connection, the eyes, right? That happens. That's the salience network. The infant brain is actually figuring out what's safe and what's threatening, right? And sometimes you change your face, or a stranger comes in and they start crying, right? They're starting to learn what's safe and what's dangerous. And so when you have a salience network issue, this is the most important network in the brain because it helps us distinguish when to internalize and go, ooh, crap, I should have did this differently, and when to externalize and engage back out. And it's happening it's happening constantly. It uses 30% of our body's energy. Of our body's energy. Not our brains, our body's energy is devoted to that. So in the adverse childhood experience studies and trauma studies, why do you think people are fatigued? Because their salience network is struggling. It's not working well, so it's burning more like 40 to 60%. And the brain will always favor that over other networks of higher cognitive function because it's survival versus higher function, right? It's like we survive before we reproduce. So that's another way we can see, and then we can actually train these networks, which is really cool. So this is another kind of fancy chart, but the reason I like to take it with a grain of salt, I like to show this because when I apply a stimulus, so say I say something or I show you a word or I make a noise, the brain starts encoding it, and it goes through all of this processing, and we're not conscious of it until here. So our conscious mind is actually lagging behind reality, and it's a very small part. So you actually have all this processing, 2 terabytes, which is 2,000 gigabytes of information a second is being encoded on this level, and we're only aware of a song's worth of it, 2,000 gigabytes of it. That's all we're aware of. So if we don't work with these deeper emotional systems, we struggle because our conscious mind doesn't have enough access to change these things. The brain always interprets things emotionally before it interprets them rationally. So we actually make the judgment within the first 100 milliseconds of hearing something, seeing something, feeling something, and then we become aware of it 200 milliseconds to 600 milliseconds later. Generally, if we're dealing with inflammatory conditions, we actually end up, the latency of that is it's a lot longer than it should be, so our mind feels slower. Right? It happens as we age. If we age too quickly, then we start getting more neurodegenerative processes. But what we do is we get an intuition because of whatever we see, feel, hear, right? If I show people who have Lyme, who suffered from it, if I show them the word Lyme, the right side of their brain activates like crazy, and you go into the judgment and the story. we actually don't reason until after the judgment. And we've brain mapped Republicans and Democrats and done this to them. It's fascinating. They make the judgments from the words before they're even conscious of it. And it's quite interesting. So you'll see here, this is what we do in complex emotional issues, and what we need to do over time is desensitize the words and the phrases and the things we're being exposed to, and this includes biotoxins. Biotoxins can cause our emotional system to overreact, and the best part about that is we can train the emotional system to not recognize them as a danger anymore. So if somebody likes something and it's rewarding, they're going to activate on the front left. And this is kind of like, this isn't a mirror image, so that side's actually the left side of the brain. We want to have more energy on the left side of the brain so we have more social engagement. And then if people are neutral, ideally you want to be in the neutral zone, right? Not like hockey, but in the neutral zone so that you're actually rational, right? If you activate fairly evenly on both sides, then you're in a true rational state. If you activate to the left too far, you're stuck in reward and addiction. I don't know, and we're all addicted to dopamine in some way. People can literally be addicted to anything. And really interestingly, actually, I've seen, and again, make sure you guys understand this, we don't do this consciously, but I'll sometimes show people a word of their diagnosis, and it activates on the left side. Their brain likes the diagnosis, it likes that. And if you don't deal with that emotional situation, you're not going to be better, right? But it's not you doing it consciously. That's important to know. It's not a moral failing where you're making it up or you're trying to get attention, right? That's all happening in the lower emotional parts. And then on the other side, if you're constantly running around avoiding everything, right? And we do this with stress. Anything that's considered stressful, we want to avoid and run away from. It activates the stress response, and we start moving further up into that dorsal vagal shutdown. So really interesting. We've with this one's I can calm myself in tense situations. We flash these phrases, right? And beforehand we get people to fill out a questionnaire, and they'll say 5 is they strongly agree with the statement, and a 1 is they strongly disagree with the statement. So this guy's answering this. He says, I can calm myself in tense situations. Essentially he's saying, oh, absolutely, I can calm myself in intense situations. And look at what his brain says. The complete opposite, disagree, right? So that's the split that can happen. It's really hard for us to understand what's happening emotionally.
Oh.
And I like to show this too. The steak, this is actually a steak on the bottom. Okay. And this person's activating on the left side. They're not going to be successful as a vegetarian. Showed you guys that one, and this is a really good map. I don't have the images to show you how this works, but we have all these areas in our brain called Brodmann areas, and there's 47 of them plus our amygdala and our hippocampus. So the almond we were talking about holds all the bad memories. And this is left side of the brain, right side of the brain. Again, you don't want to see color here. This person, you'll see they're having delta activation, so there's a little D here, and it's the lowest frequency. It goes high in inflammatory issues. And we can separate inflammatory issues out from the gut and from actual biotoxins generally, or heavy metals, by doing a VCSI test. I don't know how many people have known. Do you guys know of that? Visual contrast sensitivity? Okay. You cover your eye, one eye, and you look at lines of gray scale, contrast, and you separate whether they're going left, right, or up and down. And then you switch to the other eye, and there's essentially a pass-fail. If you're failing it, it's likelihood of biotoxin, so you can tell that these areas may be affected by that. And then they're also flagging in this theta alpha, which is trauma. So it's the limbic system hijacking that. So in some cases it gets a bit complicated because you're having inflammation and you're having trauma. And you have to work on both levels, and you can get really profound effects right in that. I'm going to talk a bit about this because, but I'm not going to get stuck on it because this is what happened for myself. Have any of you guys read the book Brain on Fire? Or heard about it? Okay. It was a woman went into the hospital severe neuropsychiatric symptoms, severe neuroinflammation, and they could not figure out what was causing it. What they don't talk too much about in the book or the movie is that it was actually chronic inflammatory response syndrome, that flamethrower that I was talking about of the immune system getting stuck on and starting the brain on fire, and complete loss of control. So there's these genetic susceptibilities that happen for people where we don't clear biotoxins well. And 25% of us have at least one of these genetic susceptibilities. So what happens is the initial immune or surveillance of these biotoxins coming into the system is missed, and they start getting stored in fat and stored in our nervous system, and eventually they damage our hypothalamus, and our entire immune regulation gets shut down. One of the most important ones is something called MSH, and so there's actually a genetic issue for low MSH here. I ended up after I figured out what I actually was dealing with, Bartonella babesia Borrelia combo, I also have these HLA genes for post-Lyme syndrome. And what happens with this is my MMP9, the really bad one, that activates with EMS, tends to shoot through the roof. And we don't fully understand why it gets stuck on like that. But I need a lot of support to make sure I keep that down. Other people that come to me with Lyme are actually sitting up in the mold susceptibility. And so they're actually being exposed to mold, and they can't handle any Lyme treatment because they're hurting. And it's actually a mycotoxin issue. And then other people who are unlucky have multi-susceptible, where they build up multiple different types of biotoxins. And then the biggest issue here is this reduced MSH. So when we build up toxins in our fat cells and our nerve cells, we can damage receptors at the hypothalamus. And again, it's not going to look like physical damage on an MRI. And then it drops MSH, we can't regulate our immune system, we can't sleep, we get chronic pain, our gut becomes dysfunctional, and over time we'll actually build up a staph overgrowth in our sinus cavity, which keeps our immune system stuck out. And so I look at this, anytime I suspect this, I look at it. Anytime I have Lyme or co-infections, I look at staph in the sinus cavity, because your immune system won't regulate if you have it. It's actually not a very expensive test. It's done through microbiology diagnostics, microbiology DX.
So if you had a staph infection, what?
What do you do about it?
No, does it seem like you have a cold, or is it like
It can. So this is an interesting thing. Is 50% of people that have it have chronic sinus issues. They'll have cysts. When you're on CT, there'll be cysts on one side or the other. 50% of people don't have any sinus issues, and they have massive overgrowth of it. So what I tend to see is 50% that don't have symptoms tend to not be clearing it at all, so they're not even getting any mucus. And they have 50% who are actually clearing a little better, and their mucosal immunity is a little bit higher. But there's a specialized prescription that you have to get, and there's a couple of pharmacies in Canada that do it. But when I went through this on myself, I had severe TMJ, like severe, and it was going right through my SCMs, causing upper back issues. Like most of my pain was from muscle tension from all that, and chiropractic adjustments. Like nothing really did anything. When I found I had Marcons, I got on treatment, it's gone. Like 6 weeks later, it's gone. So it was weird. And I used to get these weird cavitation pains back in my wisdom teeth, and they've cleared up too. I've seen a lot of that in my brain fog. Whereas the sinus cavity, literally a centimeter away from the frontal lobe, right?
So is there other places, so other than the sinuses, there's lots of us who get the swollen glands and then they go away, and so like the often then just like the sinuses, that something's sitting in those and just not getting cleared up?
Right, exactly. Yeah, and they will release exotoxins, so there is a genetic issue for where people don't clear the exotoxins from the Marcons. And Marcons is just a really fancy term. Now multi-antibiotic resistant coagulase negative staph. Fancy staph. Call it fancy staph. But it's multiple antibiotic resistant. But there is a treatment developed by Richie Shoemaker that clears it out.
So can I, if you don't mind, if I can say that on Shoemaker's Surviving Mold website, for $15 you can do a sort of prorated version of that visual test.
Yes.
Yeah, for anybody that's feeling like they're going this way, you just go and you do it online, and it gives you a percentage on where you think you're at in terms of this toxicity.
Yeah.
I don't mind posting it if others are interested. I can post that on the website if you want.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, if you guys have questions, I do free phone consults, so I can answer. I'm going to talk a little bit about hormones because this always comes into the picture when there's trauma reactions going on in the brain. Because what happens is one of our most important steroid hormones, called Pregnenolone, starts getting converted over to cortisol. We call it Pregnenolone steal. Anytime that there's a demand to build cortisol and there's a stress response, it gets directed that way.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is now our sex hormones don't build themselves. Right? Survive before reproduction. So we know that these steroid hormones are important for immune regulation. We know they're important for brain function. Anybody who's ever had really low testosterone or really low DHEA, right? It can affect your mood. It can affect your cognition. High or low cortisol is going to cause issues. Pregnenolone, this is an interesting one because I send out, every time I see somebody, I send out a big list for them to go talk to their doctor to get testing done because we want to try to get as much covered as we can. And I've had one doctor actually know what Pregnenolone was. One. Everybody else, I don't know if he just pretended he did. Everybody else either refuses to run it or they'll say straight up, I don't even know what that is. Right? And it's one of the most important neurosteroids. We can't build new synaptic pathways and new connections in our brain without it. It's extremely important. It's low in a lot of people with biotoxins and with, if you've ever had old head injuries, old whiplash injuries, it tends to go low. Sorry, Echo, you had a question?
So what would happen if you were in the situation of the Pregnenolone steal and you were taking the supplement or got the prescription here or you took the supplement? Like, would it be more harmful then? Like, would the steal increase then, or would it help balance things out?
It depends. Great question. If somebody has already has really high cortisol or high ACTH, which means their brain is trying to stimulate cortisol, I don't give it. Because you're just going to build more cortisol up. You need to make sure you shut down this response, or at least shut it down, at least while you're in the process of doing the Pregnenolone, you're kind of in the process of shutting it down at the same time. But sometimes if people are really low, like you should be between 100 and 200. I've seen people like at an 11, right? And if you're that low, then I'm supplementing it. If your cortisol is low and you're in a hypocortisol state, I'm supplementing it. And same thing with progesterone, it can get shunted down to cortisol. So
yeah, if you have very low cortisol,
then it's helpful. Yeah, for sure. So and it depends because you have total cortisol in the blood, and then you have free cortisol, and so that's why there's 8 different transition states from perfectly healthy to adrenal exhaustion. Is the body has ways in which it binds hormones. So they're called binding globulins. So if we have too much estrogen, we're going to bind it up so that it's not affecting us too much. Same thing with cortisol. If we have too much cortisol, we start kind of binding it, so the free cortisol can drop really low. And then you're looking at more herbal approaches like ashwagandha, licorice extract to get the free levels back up. Some people are low in blood and their total's low. That's when you know you're getting into that deeper stage. And then it is important to bring the adrenals back online slowly because it's hard for your body to heal if your adrenals are down, right? So and you won't tolerate treatment well. Yeah.
So in terms of the hormones, like lots of times, you come back and something is out of whack and the doctors just don't seem to know how to respond, or your hormones work in such a cycle themselves, it's hard to tell. Oh,
there it is.
there you go.
Yeah, there's and again the hard thing with that is they have their ranges, and unless it's cortisol, AM cortisol, they're not going to have something that's going to say H or L. And if it doesn't say H or L, high or low, that's actually flagging out of Alberta Health range, there's not really much they can do about it legally. Their protocols are things have to be out of range, and a lot of times things for them have to be way out of range before they can do anything. I've seen people's TSHs out of 5,
Mm-hmm.
and 4.5 is the limit for thyroid, and they're still like, well, it's not really that far out. When really we're like, if you're over a 2, you're getting low thyroid symptoms, right? So,
They also don't get paid for anything to do with hormones. They can't bill because hormones are non-essential.
right.
For anybody that doesn't know that, your doctor doesn't get paid for hormones or anything to do with treating your hormones, so that's also why they
Not a
won't.
concern.
Not really a concern.
Yeah, it's not. Well, and they're not taught that how symptomatic somebody can become from having imbalances, right? And it is important. It is a symphony. So, you know, just because you're not sleeping and you're having hot flashes does not mean estrogen's to blame. We've literally documented every steroid hormone can contribute to hot flashes, and it's important to make sure it's not happening at the level of the brain, or you won't get improvement with bioidentical hormones. Some people feel worse on them. Oh, I like to show this because I had a conversation with a few doctors about this. They say that head injuries have no effect on hormones,
What?
and there's no research on head injury and the effect on hormones. And I researched it, and in 0.13 seconds, I got 209,000 results. But
There's that guy in
no
California
research.
that only does TBIs with hormones.
Yeah.
He's amazing.
Is that Mark Gordon?
Yeah, totally amazing.
He trained me.
Did he?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's a great speaker too.
He's a great speaker.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you know, again, I just kind of wanted to illustrate that you have a lot of similar reactions no matter what hormones are out, and neurotransmitters are similar as well. But really, the big thing with these guys is you're going to drive a norepinephrine epinephrine response up if your trauma response is stuck. So sometimes hormone neurotransmitter imbalance is actually symptomatic, and it's not the cause in itself.
Would it still be worthwhile to treat though, even for just short-term symptom relief?
Yes, because you need to stabilize the system if you're gonna get it back to where it needs to go. So this is what the form of medication that we talk about is. Medications are really useful when we use them responsibly, and we get someone on a medication, and this includes natural, right? Natural stimulants, things that we're trying to like force the body to do something different. But we need to be responsible and look at what's causing it, because we can't depend on things to work forever. Plus, you get side effects with long-term use of any medication, right? So it is really important to get to the bottom of it over time. But it's also important to feel half good while you go through the process. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but I guess actually it is important because if you've ever had head injuries, your immune regulation is automatically kind of whacked out. So you're more prone to developing infection activation in the gut, Borrelia activation, right? We know the biggest thing with Borrelia is getting it to go into remission, right? If we can successfully get it to go into remission, I still test positive for it on PCR, right? The ultrasound for both PCR that Klinghardt and Ruggiero developed is amazing at finding it. So you'll always find the DNA, so you know it's there. But if it's in remission and you're symptom-free, then who cares, right? And so what I found, and again, I think this predisposed me quite badly because I was a running back in football, and I'm obviously not very tall. So I used my head like this all the time, every single play. I was hitting somebody, whether I had the ball or whether I was blocking. I was hitting somebody with the top of my head. So there's a lot of really sensitive structures up in the upper neck. We know if you fracture or break the C1 or C2, you have a very high likelihood of death because your body can't breathe, can't run the heart anymore, right? You're done for. So there's a lot of glandular structures up through in the hypothalamus as well, and so you get dysregulation of MSH, and now you're prone to things activating. And I think for me that was why it hit me so hard. Was my immune system was so dysregulated. I didn't really know it, right? Our metric of health is pain, unfortunately. If we don't feel a symptom, we're healthy. But a lot of things can be imbalanced, and all it takes is that one trigger, like a head injury, motor vehicle accident, tick bite, and yes.
So how do you reverse that if you've had head injuries?
Great question. Thank you.
Like,
I'm really feeling you today. So.
It's your head injury.
So upper cervical alignment is really important to look at. NUCA chiropractors are the best at assessing that and fixing it. The other thing that that we do is we actually adjust your idling rate. So the big reason why this is an issue is you have a generator back here that generates the lowest frequency in our brain called an ISF frequency, and it goes through and all the other frequencies ride on top of it, and it talks with all the other generators. So it's kind of like the CEO back here. When we get a whiplash injury, which I mean, any head injury, you get a neck injury. The neck actually only takes 1/10 the amount of force as the brain to injure. So oftentimes we don't even need to have a true concussion. We can just have a subconcussive blow and it can throw the neck out. That idling rate gets shifted. So you might be at like 0.003 hertz, and when you hit your head, you go down to 0.0025, and now everything's dysfunctioning. We have a type of neurofeedback that trains that back to your optimal idling rate, and everybody has an optimal idling rate, and it also helps with resourcing. Has anybody ever done like trauma treatment, brain spotting, or EMDR? You know they talk about resourcing all the time. That's the frequency that resources our brain. Make sure that our brain's not over or under resourcing areas, and that's what will cause people to react to trauma treatment or even hurts. If you I don't know, again, if anyone in here has ever done direct treatment against Lyme with either herbals or homeopathics or antibiotics, and I've seen some people literally they take one drop and they're hurting.
Yes,
So
we
it's
have a
like-
few people like that just can't even start treatment because of it.
Yeah, I've been there, right? So you need to get the brain resourcing, so you do this, same thing you do with head injury, you get it resourcing, then you get it regulating in the trauma regions, then you treat. Because if you don't have all that, your system's way too fired up, and it just react all over the place.
That makes
So
sense.
thank you for bringing up the solutions base. Offer the problem and no solution. What a jerk, kid. So last topic I want to just quickly touch on is pain, because as we know, it's probably one of the most common symptoms that happens. I see arthritis and I immediately test for these infections. We have all these fancy names for chronic pain, but the definition of chronic pain is loss of allodynia. And allodynia is a fancy name for, when you like hit your knee on something or your shin, and it's like that. Screaming, almost tearing pain, that's allodynia. And allodynia should resolve within 3 months. So if we get surgery or we break our femur, we're probably on pain meds to manage allodynia until we're healed, right? But if it persists longer than that, we automatically know that we're dealing with these chronic associated molecular patterns called AMPs. And with AMPs, you have these different things that sit in between the this is the danger safety thing again. With pain, it's considered a danger. So you have pathogens, right? Borrelia, Bartonella, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, right? Viral issues, parasitic issues. You have damage associated. So anybody who's gotten these infections and has previously had like a knee injury or neck injury or back injury, it tends to be the first place you get affected, right? So you almost think it's the old injury acting up. Because there's already too much inflammation being spit into here. This is called the neuronal threesome. First, this neuron sending pain signal. This neuron sending the signal to the brain. And then it's also modulating what the brain is wanting to tell this fiber as well. So you're actually having an ascending, descending. When it's allodynia, and it's an acute, I just hit my knee type scenario, it's only ascending. I know logically and emotionally that pain's going to go away, right? I physically hurt myself, it's going to go away. When it comes out of nowhere, we don't know it's ever going to go away. So our brain freaks out and actually sends a descending signal, more inflammation gets pushed out of here. And it's really interesting because we did a study on the cognition and the behavior of pain. And pain's a lot easier to study. I mean, we could talk about any symptom. Any symptom's painful if it is causing you distress. So I've seen people break down and cry because their memory is not working like it used to be, right? So obviously these things are painful to the brain in an emotional way. We did a study of people with chronic neck pain, and we got them to turn their neck as far as they could before it hurt, and as far as they could before it hurt. And we used a laser to measure the angle, right? Not like the Austin Powers movie with the sharks. And then we popped virtual reality set on them. And we got them to turn their head again. And we made it look like the environment was was going slower, so we made it look like they weren't turning their head as far, and they could turn their head further, both ways. And then we did the opposite, and we made it look like the environment was moving faster, so that they were turning their head further than they actually were, and they couldn't turn their head as far. So the brain actually learns what it needs to do to make sure there's no pain, but the problem is, what it'll do is it'll turn, we adapt our behaviors, and our brain will let us, okay, we turn to here and it hurts, so we're only going to turn to here. And then eventually you get to the point where you can't turn here just like this. And a lot of it is actually learned. And so we have to do work with that to unteach, de-learn the brain and not do that, and to treat that motion like it's a threat, because that's essentially what it's doing.
So is there a lot of that, like an overrepresentation than what maybe the medical profession like historically has known? Because it, like, where I have a trouble reconciling some of this is like, you know, I hear weekly, oh, I went into the neurologist, he told me it was all in my head. I went in and said,
It is all in your head. Your brain is creating it.
Yeah.
But
the psychiatrists aren't helping us out, right? Like, that's the other side of that, right?
When they say it's all in your head, they mean you're crazy.
Yeah.
You're making this up. You want attention. Get
But
out.
you're saying part of that is that, right? Your body adjusts to the pain, and then because it's there, you start. It's self-reinforcing, right? So how do we find balance with that then, right?
Yeah, so you need to teach the brain. So here, I'm just going to show you guys something. So this is the way that the brain communicates. So when it detects danger, it sends it up to information up to the midbrain, and then it relays it. It's like a toss off to the limbic system, and it goes, "Okay, limbic, is this dangerous or safe? Right? Do we approach this or do we run from it? Do we avoid it?" And then the limbic system makes a stamp called a neurotag in the brain. So it remembers, last time I turned here, it hurt, so I'm only going to turn to here. But it all happens unconsciously. We're not consciously aware of it. It's our emotional system regulating it. And over time, the cortex actually gets shut down. So we're not even logically aware of this. We just walk around and do what we need to do to not feel pain. And so there's a way to assess this. So the more that you pile things up in here, like pathogens, emotional issues from the limbic system, right? This danger knob just keeps turning itself up, and then it's just a self-fulfilling prophecy after that. So this is how we pick up neurotags. The area above the T is high, which means the limbic system is recruiting that area, and it's over-resourcing it in these higher frequencies of base. So you know you're dealing with a neurotag. And it will happen emotionally too. Area 5 and 7, overactivating, causes us to stop trusting ourselves. We lose self-esteem, we lose confidence, we can't make decisions, because the limbic system's hijacking our sense of self and our ability to actually make decisions. It's like, no, you know what, man, what you've been doing sucks, you keep giving me pain, you suck, you're not allowed to make decisions for us anymore. And so we go into this internalization of almost like a guilt, like, you know, I'm worthless, I'm helpless, I'm hopeless, right? And that kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the start. And so you gotta train those neurotags out, because otherwise your brain pays way too much attention to everything else that's going on. And if it's happening in areas 1, 2, and 3, that's their somatosensory cortex. That's what's feeding info from the body up to the brain. And it's overactive, which means it's like, okay, pay attention. Pay attention to every little thing that's going on in your body, right? And it's stressful. It's stressful because you start going, oh my god, what is this? Am I going to get that gallbladder attack again? And our body starts tightening. And so, but this is happening at the level of the brain, and I did which is really exciting, presentation for some psychiatrists at hospital, and it was really well received.
At this hospital?
No.
I didn't think so. Those guys are way too hopeful there.
But really well received, and then we do have some people in the field of QEEG. We have neurologists and we have psychiatrists, which is great. So we'll be moving that way. The problem is these people all work for Alberta Health, so they need to do what they're told, or they don't have their license. So yeah, there's definitely a lot, and this is the process of neurofeedback. The limbic system doesn't understand logic. Right? Try to reason with a crying 6-month-old. It doesn't work very well. So what we need to do is we need to talk in the language it understands, and all it understands is what we hear, what we see, what we smell, what we taste, and what we feel in our body. And if something's off in any of those senses, or it gets a snapshot of, oh my God, this room reminds me of something bad, then it activates the danger response. And when you're sitting at rest in a chair, relaxed, and that's happening, you're so prone to activation. And that's what happened to me, because I never knew when I was going to get a panic attack, and I was trying to avoid them all the time. I was getting snapshots of everything in every sense and all these things. And so I'd walk into a room and I'd get a sensation, and it would just be like full panic, right? And I had to learn, I had to train that out. And the way that we train it out is we remove feedback when the system's not doing what we want it to. So when the system's going more over to the right, where things are balancing a bit more, we actually reward the system with feedback. So visual info, a movie goes nice and bright, music plays. We have a video game chair that gives vibrotactile feedback. There's video games, especially for kids, where they'll perform better in the game when their brain's doing what we want it to. So they have fun with it because they feel like they're controlling it. Because the limbic system's addicted to stimuli, it's its job to bring as much information in as it can and figure out if it's safe or dangerous. And the more info it can bring in, the better decisions it makes, right? We know that. From scientific data, we know that. And I actually got addicted to that because I wanted the more I could bring in, the more I could learn, the better I could get myself out of this danger response. So it was beneficial in the end. But that's how we train the limbic system is kind of this reward punishment, although we don't use electroshock anymore. That would be unethical. You had a question?
Yes, we do.
How young have you done any? How young have children been to you to see this process?
1 year old is the youngest that we've trained. Yeah.
Wow.
And it's kind of cool. You have databases, so everybody's brain gets compared back to gender matched, age matched, and handedness matched. So if we brain mapped you, we would compare your brain waves to other women your age. Right. So that's how we quantify. We have to have databases. So we build databases based on, we have a questionnaire, and we make sure people haven't had head injuries, they haven't had trauma, they're not having any cognitive issues, energy issues. If they are, they don't get to be in the database. So we built these huge databases, and they just keep getting bigger over time, which makes our information more and more accurate. So then we can tell, because if you look at an EEG, you can't tell any of this, right? You have to be able to quantify it as a micro measurement. So, yeah, good question.
I heard that that's really good for kids with the ADHD. It could be a treatment in and of itself, just a standalone, hey?
Huge. ADHD is largely trauma-based. The brain is hypermobilizing. It's like it's constantly trying to keep an eye out on what's going on. The body's moving all the time so that it's ready to mobilize. And then we can't focus because our brain wants to be looking at everything else and bringing in as much info as it can. It's oftentimes limbic hijacking that's happening.
So this is kind of a strange question, but does it have to be that person's trauma, or can that be passed down from will generational trauma show up in this as well?
Great question. I love that. Yeah.
I'm really good looking too at two things.
Not at all.
Joking. Never seen somebody so excited about one of my questions.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, that's great. So yes, there's a researcher at Mount Sinai University, a psychiatrist. So they're not all. Who's doing intergenerational trauma research, and she's looking at 2 and 3 generations following the Holocaust. Yeah. And there's altered methylation patterns. So remember how I was talking about the epigenetics, the butterfly turning into the caterpillar turning into the butterfly? This is probably going to dysfunction on me. So,
There it goes.
there we go. So what's happening is there's a state of methylation that happens on different parts of the gene, and anywhere that a gene is methylated, it won't turn on. So it can't express a protein or an enzyme, or it can't regulate. There's methylation patterns that are specific to these survivors of the Holocaust. So it's predisposing them to trauma. It's making them less tolerant to traumatizing situations, which is why it's really important that we don't compare our traumas. And we don't go, well, your symptoms are way better than mine. Just try dealing with what I'm dealing with. Because it doesn't really matter what you're dealing with, it's how your limbic system is reacting to what you're dealing with, right? So yes, 2-3 generations is carrying down. When our mom when our grandma is pregnant with our mom, we're a precursor egg cell being epigenetically influenced by maternal stress, right? So we're not even that many generations away from, well, I mean, me particularly, I'm quite young, and I'm not that many generations away from the Second World War, right? So there's a lot of stuff like that going on, and there's so many good therapies and treatments, and the favorite comment from doctors, because the only level that they work on is here, the favorite comment is it's controversial. No, it just has limitations, just like everything that you guys do.
So that would create like gene mutations?
Not mutations. So that's the cool thing, is it's actually what's the best way to describe it? It's just like flicking a switch on and off. So the switch isn't broken, it's just off. Or it's on. And we can go and we can flip it on or off. And then it literally changes our physiology. And when our physiology changes, our psychology changes. And we automatically start perceiving our world different. And now we're not in pain anymore.
So if there is a gene mutation in there somewhere?
No, it's a switch that's
No, but if there what?
If there was.
Yeah.
In what way? What's your
Well, I
train
don't
of
know. How do
thought?
you end up with a mutated gene of some sort?
What's your, like, in what case? So 1% of disorders are genetic purely. 1%. Very small.
No, like a methylation, you can't do different.
Okay, I see what you're getting at. So like the MTHFR gene. It's not a mutation. It's a single nucleotide polymorphism, which means that it's just not functioning as well as it could be. There's no such it's very rare to see something. If you had an MTHFR was like a complete deletion, like it wasn't even there, you wouldn't survive past. Your mom would have miscarried. So those, the MTHFRs, and we've gotten pretty obsessed with those, but really it's just 30%. If you have a homozygous and it's as bad as you can get, it's still operating at 30%, right?
So it can be reversed.
So what you're talking about is the blueprint of DNA. So these are all the exact same blueprint, right? So what we're talking about is being able to turn it on and turn it off. And if you can express it, it doesn't matter if it's 30% efficient or 100. You're expressing it, you're doing what it needs to do. You might need a low level of support. But we've gotten stuck in that, right? Where we're blaming our genetic blueprints for issues that aren't a genetic blueprint issue.
Oh yeah, just wondering how to address them.
It's a great question, yeah. So in a lot of cases, like, we still run DNA because we want to see where people are weak so we can support. But it's never like a mutation to the point where the gene's not working at all. Yeah, it's just not working as well. And so there's a lot of good genetic studies. I can't remember his last name now. Methyl-genetic nutrition. Robert something. Anyway, he's looked at studies of like why do people express Lyme and other people don't? And there is a lot of genetic weakness behind it. Iron SNPs, methylation SNPs, detox SNPs, neurotransmitter production SNPs, but they can all be supported. That's the cool thing. You can get them to upregulate. So the way I describe it is, if you have a really bad football team, but you don't have any rules, genetics don't play by the rules, you can put 40 people on the field and you're still better than 10, right? So it doesn't matter if your team's really bad, if you can put more players out on the field, then you can still be just as good, right? That makes sense. That's a great question. It's a really hard topic to explain.
Can any of this actually help people with Alzheimer's or dementia?
Absolutely. Look up Dr. Dale Bredesen.
Okay.
I can give you the info. Dr. Dale Bredesen is a colleague. He has developed, I don't think I have his book in here. No, I don't. His book's called End of Alzheimer's.
Sorry.
That's okay.
He was talking to me.
His book's called End of Alzheimer's, and he's found, he was in research in Alzheimer's for 35 years, and he found that there were 35 different reasons that people would develop amyloid buildup, because that's the main cause of Alzheimer's. And Lyme is one of them, and he has 6 different subtypes of it. And essentially the way he describes it is it's like there's 35 holes in the ceiling, and most people have at least 5. Some people have as much as 30, and our drugs will only fill one of those holes. So that's why we failed. Like, I don't know if you guys know this, but Pfizer completely scrapped their research and development in Alzheimer's.
Yep.
Completely scrapped it because they 99.7% failed because we're not addressing the cause. And we went in and we were like, let's just remove amyloid. Like, let's just get rid of amyloid and then people will get better. And people got worse. They actually degenerated faster because amyloid is a protection. It's the brain's trying to protect itself from something. And if we don't go in there and remove what it's trying to protect itself from, then it's going to keep slowly deteriorating. So his book's incredible. I think he's at 42 now. He's found 42 different things. But in his pilot study, 12 out of 13 people with diagnosed dementia, Alzheimer's, or cognitive impairment improved. Some of them improved back into the normal functioning.
What was that book?
The End of Alzheimer's. Dr. Dale Brevison, his medical doctor. When he took his, he talks about this in his book, but when he took his protocol to get approved for human trial, he got approved for human trials, and then he went to try to get approval for it to be brought in as a protocol. And the doctor said, so you don't have a drug? Like, we need something that's a recipe here, like, this is the drug, and they're like, we can't approve this. And afterwards, a bunch of the doctors came up to him and said, like, give us your card, we have a few people we want to send you. But they couldn't approve it because how do you teach everybody a protocol like that, right? So they have 15 minutes and we spend 2 hours.
With the correlation between Lyme and Alzheimer's, definitely have some interesting stuff for us.
Well, amyloid is actually a antimicrobial. So a lot of times amyloid is being expressed because it's trying to kill off an infection in the brain. Yeah. Absolutely.
Would that same go for the arthritis in the knees and the joints?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so you got it. Yeah. So the immune system invades into that area to try to fight it off. But we know Borrelia is smart, and then we know there's all these other reasons that cause the immune system to go too flamethrowery, right? And then you'll get issues. And if you don't have rheumatoid, right, you can still have just as much pain, but you just they're not finding that antibody because it's not a true autoimmune reaction. It's your body's trying to fight something. MS is very similar. You see any hyperintensities in an MRI, you almost guarantee that there's microglial infiltration to try to fight something off. And we know that various infections will actually infiltrate into the myelin, and when they get into the myelin, the immune system attacks them, breaks down the myelin, and now we're in an MS situation. The overlap in the states of incidence of MS and incidence of Borrelia is almost a perfect overlap.
So they mimic.
Yeah, MS is very essentially it suggests that MS is just a symptom, right?
Yeah, I'm wondering if there is any.
Right. Well, there's so many things like that, right? Fibromyalgia. I can't find the reason, so there you go. You're in this box now.
They don't even look anymore, though. Hey,
Well, they don't
it's
know
alarming.
And
But
trauma.
I mean, it used to be that last end, so you've gone through 5 years of looking, and they can't find anything, and then they go fibro or CFS. But now it's like the first instance you're being thrown right into that, and that's unfortunate.
Yeah, as long as you just recognize that it's a symptom. And the big thing is trauma. They don't have a way to diagnose trauma.
Yeah.
And trauma, there's 350 documented symptoms of trauma. So you're not going to get that diagnosis, especially if you haven't been cop or veteran or something where it's this stereotypical PTSD.
So then if we're looking at that generational trauma where the limbic system, like our limbic system is already primed and showing the signs of the trauma from the generations before, then does that mean it would actually take less trauma? Like, I'm just conscious
exactly.
now that words are considered violence, and we can't even hear certain things because it's too hurtful for some people.
Yeah, totally.
And without getting judgmental about whether that's real or not, but it feels like many things have brought us to that point, and this could be one of those inclusions.
Yeah, we've been taught in our culture to suppress our emotions unless they're happy. So we haven't learned how to regulate real well. And yeah, if you guys want, like, this is, in my opinion, he's the best trauma researcher, Bessel van der Kolk. The Body Keeps the Score was the first book he wrote. He's done research on anything that's suggested to be good for trauma. He's researched it. He's huge into neurofeedback right now. Incredible guy. Yeah, and he's a medical doctor. He's a psychiatrist. But it does, like, anything that we, like, if we can't regulate, we automatically, we are prone to trauma if we can't regulate. So, you know, again, we've grown up in a culture where sad and mad are bad and happy's good. And that's just not reality. We get sad and that's okay, but we've really largely learned to suppress that stuff. And then we don't learn how to manage it.
Well, now I'm looking at that hygiene effect where they're talking about where, like, on top of that, kids aren't facing any adversity anymore.
Right.
And so, like, how we got from, you know, we started with a few peanut allergies, now everybody has them because everybody put them away. We put away failing and adversity, and now there's sort of this theory coming out that we needed to exercise that, we needed to flex those skills of overcoming, and I just wonder how this is, my mind's just trying to put it all together, right? Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things. I mean, we were still using physical punishment. We still use physical punishment, right? And the American Pediatrics is like essentially saying, like, that's not how you deal with this, right? But then we also try to protect our kids from feeling bad, which isn't. It's important that they feel bad, and it's important they understand that it's okay to feel bad, because they'll learn to regulate. It's okay. Other people feel this, okay, and they start learning how to regulate. But most important years are the first 2 years of life. So I've actually had some kids be brought in, and I've actually not
feel bad.
No.
Do you just sit there and pinch kids, Corey?
I've actually made mom come work with me first, and then I'll work with the daughter or son if he's still having issues, because we mimic especially our mom. We mimic the emotions of our mom in the first 2 years of life, unknowingly, unconsciously. That's how we learn. And then we move towards other people. And so actually another good research study is the more strangers and the more people the kids get exposed to at a younger age, the better they regulate and the more socially engaged they are.
So it's good I left them at the mall for an afternoon.
Totally. Bring them around strangers, bring them to parties, right? Yeah, no, that it actually shows they're more socially engaged because they're used to seeing, and they get emotional information from other people too, right? So they're not so focused on the emotional info from one person.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of bubble kids these days. And don't know how to
Well,
cope outside the
we've learned
bubble.
to get scared of everything, right? We're scared of fat, we're scared of salt, now we're scared of sugar. You know, what else is next? So.
Interesting.
Thanks, guys. Great questions.
What does a treatment plan typically look like for an average patient?
So, it's totally dependent on what you've already had tested, what you've done, and what you show in the brain map. But if I say somebody comes in and I see trauma, I like to work on that level right off the bat, because it has a stronger effect than working on the biochemical level. So in that case, what we would do is heart rate variability, people learning to regulate the heart rate that I was showing at the start. Sometimes we'll do the ISF, where we're actually getting the brain resourcing properly. Other times we'll do low-level laser therapy, TDCS, things to try to start kind of pushing the brain where we'd like it to go. And then the neurofeedback process is based on, again, what networks are out of place, what's kind of going on deeper down, are there neurotags, and then we train the brain based on stimulus feedback. It's an hour-long appointment. I like people to get a foundation of about 10 in, generally 2 a week if possible. Some people come from out of town and they do 10 in a week. It 2 a day. We do an intensive. And it's just really about finding, we can see when your brain is starting to fatigue and when it's not tolerating it. We do 10 sessions and then we remap, reevaluate, reassess everything, and then see where we go next. And I found it's a really, really unique way for the brain to kind of tell us what's going on. Right? Like if it's pure expression in the delta, you're dealing with environmental inflammatory issues, and it's about looking at the gut, what's contributing to inflammation. But if they're showing a double whammy of that in emotion, I always start with emotion.
So then do you refer off, like, let's say that you said like the gut or like the Lyme treatment, would you refer off to that, or do you?
Depends. I'm trained in functional medicine, so I assess all of that, and then I have people I work with if I need to. Like, we don't do any IV or anything, so if I feel like people might need IV therapy, if I think people are really traumatized or they're emotionally dissociating, was that you? You can talk to, yeah. Then there's a different form of treatment called brain spotting, EMDR, comprehensive resource modeling, that I get them to do. If I suspect jaw issues or upper cervical because of an old head injury, I'll send them to the Tachycardia. So yeah, we have a huge group of practitioners we work with, just depending. I mean, you can't do it all, right? So you need to know as much as you can about everything and refer out. So I usually, like, if I'm seeing something that looks biochemical, internal environment, environmental issues like mold or something, I'm really well versed in that because I've dealt with so many complex chronic cases. Then I work with that for the most part, and then if we get up into the structural, musculoskeletal system, because there's also that, then we refer out for that. And we even send people, like, once we have people fairly work through that, we'll send people to certain events to work on, like, what's your values, what's your purpose. We're not taught to actually live by our values. We live by cultural values, right? We live by what culture tells us. You go to college, you get a job, and if not, then you're failing in life, right? And so we help people get connected back with that once the fear-based system's trained out. And that's like guys like Dr. Martini, Mark Wolin, who actually wrote the book It Didn't Start With You. Probably should have closed this prematurely. Wrote the book It Didn't Start With You, all about intergenerational trauma. Also an amazing book. He spent like, is it working? Yeah, so It Didn't Start With You. He does events in Calgary twice a year. Help uncover family trauma, underlying developmental trauma, intergenerational trauma, and he's highly versed in the research. I think it took him like 15 years to write that book. It's just incredible. And he does audiobook, and his voice is just entrancing.
That'd be a good one.
Yes.
So what about, I'm just trying to get also a sense of your clinic, like what if somebody's happy with the doc they have but interested in the neurofeedback? Can they do a slice with you?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so I just like to get records of everything. So we work with a few functional medicine docs in Calgary, some MDs, and they send us a ton of people to get brain maps because they're kind of stumped, right? And usually when you're stumped, if you're a functional medicine doc and you're like IFM, CFMP trained or anti-aging trained, you're usually looking at everything. And if you're not fixing people there, then they know that it's a higher level, so they're sending people. So generally, if you've gone through all that, I might look at things and go, well, this might be needing this, but other than that, I'll just work with the neurofeedback and work on that level 100%. Yeah, we're not about forcing anybody to do anything. It's that doesn't build a therapeutic healing relationship. So.
What about when people are on treatments? Do you prefer them to be on them to get a proper feedback of what's really going on?
If you're on if you're on like antibiotics or something like that,
Antibiotics or holistic or anything.
Yeah, so we know for the most part we know how those will change the brain, but it's actually better to work like while doing both at the same time because you're training your brain to not overreact to things like it hurts or a minor fluctuation in something, and you're also giving the brain what it needs to rebuild, right? Because you are teaching the brain to build new synapses, like kind of like how electricians or power linemen run new power lines, right? You need energy resources and stuff to do that. So in a lot of cases, it's actually better to be doing something like that for sure. Yeah. Sir, you had a question back here.
Well, obviously you're not getting paid by Alberta Health, are you? So, how much do you charge?
So our full initial assessment's $995, and then we're $120
How much?
$995.
$995?
Yeah. There's two funding agencies that fund us. The Neurological Wellness Association and Breaking Free Foundation. If you want any info, just send us an email. We can send you on how to apply for that. And the way that they work, Breaking Free Foundation is 100% covered. If they accept you, the Neurological Wellness Association will cover 25 to 100% based on your application. So there's ways to go about it, and there are sometimes insurance coverage. If there's a disability claim, that's covered. So
Is there ever any age?
Yeah, absolutely.
And covered?
Yeah.
They don't have to
It's
apply
all
for
about,
it?
what's that?
They don't have to apply prior to that for AISH?
Probably.
I would think H would have to
If you were on,
approve.
AISH.
yeah, you'd have to get approval,
Pre-approved.
but that's,
Yeah.
so that's something, like, again, if you just send us an email, we can work with you how we need to. I don't deal with much of that, I just know that it's in place, so.
And sorry, one more question about how it runs. Like, I know you have a few different offices you run out of. So do you do the neurofeedback and everything in your Red Deer office? Like, it's a full
Every office,
office.
Yeah, it's an essential part. So yeah, so
Sounds
in
like
the initial assessment, you do an hour and a half long brain assessment, and then we get all your medical records, everything you've done, history, intakes, and then you sit down with me for another hour and a half, go through everything, set a plan up, and see what's going on.
Can you access AHS records?
No, we're opted out. It's too much of a nightmare.
So somebody has to remember their history?
No, we do medical records release.
Oh,
You
good.
just fill out a release form and we send it out to get all your records. Yeah.
Now, so I had a kerfuffle with the doctor's office where they would only give me certain records now, and they're saying they won't. And I was wondering if it was, I get conspiratorial about that sort of thing, right? Where they're really trying to shut a lot of doors for.
Well, they're trying to
get-
protect their industry.
Yeah.
We see what's happening. Chronic illness is on the rise. If our medicine's so good, why are we sicker?
Why is everybody going everywhere else? Yeah.
People aren't going to stop looking for answers, trying to get themselves better.
No, that's right. They're not.
It's actually unlawful to withhold medical records. You can't withhold
Oh yeah, you
somebody's
were the one that
property.
cried on the phone.
We've had neurologists tell me, stop looking. Just stop looking and take your stuff. I'm like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
One more question.
Yeah,
Is
sure.
you say like is all the treatment take place in house, or do you exercise with the send people home with the do
Well,
is
because
there a
we
way
do.
of doing therapy as well as seeing once you're in the program?
Totally, and we actually have the ability to do at-home neurofeedback now, which is really cool. We usually don't like to do it right off the bat. We like to have some regulation take place in the clinic, but then we can send you with a headset, and you can do neurofeedback at home, and it's a lot
Oh,
less
that's
expensive.
cool.
And there's heart rate variability training. HeartMath has some really good biofeedback devices that you can do at home, and we can bring you into the clinic and set you up with them and show you how to use them. They're amazing. But the difficulty with doing exercises at home is the conscious cognitive piece is one thing, but really it's being run by this unconscious, subconscious system that we don't have a lot of access to. But we can definitely give you some tools and like, okay, if this reaction happens, here's what we want you to do, here's a mantra, here's a breath work, here's this and that. Yeah, because you also, what'll happen is you'll have a way, when we start working with you, you'll have things come up, and it'll give you a chance to integrate them in a new way. The cognitive piece is definitely important, for sure.
It's very complex what you do. It seems like it's very intricate. It's very interesting.
Yeah, it's highly personalized. So I know I'm doing a lot of speculation up here. It's highly personalized. So everyone's so different, and that's why you haven't seen it integrated. How do you standardize a protocol when we're all incredibly different, right? So you can't. So
Well, and I don't think you can for this disease. Like,
No.
me and Joe here, like, I would do a treatment, get better, and he'd go and try it and wouldn't, and I'd try and he wouldn't.
Yeah.
There's something sort of missing about the disease where people just can't fall. There isn't a standard treatment, and in that way, you can understand why the doctors are frustrated. Why aren't people getting better? You should be, right?
And it's
So-
really easy, in some ways, I mean, for what they see and the tools they're given, it's easier for them emotionally to go, this thing doesn't exist. Like, just, like, stop bothering me because I'm so emotionally, it's being a practitioner is emotionally heavy. So, you have people coming in and they're not getting better, and especially if you got into it to help people, it's hard, it's a struggle for them too, right? And there's a healthy level of dissociation we have to have, always. Otherwise we hit trauma. Right?
I was going to say too, even in the physician's level, they're screening people. So the more complex, they don't want you because it's too much drag on them emotionally
Well,
as
and
well.
actually, what I've seen over the last few years is a lot of doctors being quite happy that people are coming to work with us, because it's like, okay, like,
Dump you off?
Hopefully, yeah. Well, maybe,
See ya,
maybe, right? But they've been quite supportive, and there's very few. I'd say probably 1 out of 100 that will refuse to send medical records and just be extremely abrasive. It's very few, and I usually tell people like, it's like find another doctor, anybody, right?
It's really good. Our little local town doctor is now training in functional medicine.
Really?
Yeah, and he's...
Are you from Stettler?
No, Three Hills.
Three Hills, okay.
He's 70 something.
Really?
Or 102. Like, he's crazy.
Good for him.
Yeah.
You should send me his info. Love
Yeah.
to connect with him.
Yeah, he's amazing.
There's a guy in Stettler who's a medical doctor from Africa. Who's like, he came to one of my talks and he talked my ear off for like 20 minutes after.
Yeah.
So it's changing, and that's why I say, like, advocate for yourself, and don't let your emotions get stuck in your story of, oh, this guy won't listen to me, this guy won't. Just keep going with him. Just find someone else. There's gonna be
He's
someone.
he's been great with Connor. He's
Great.
good, and he understands it all. When he doesn't understand, and he's like, you bring me something, and we'll try that. Like, bring
Awesome.
me stuff. And we email back and forth. So.
That's great. You gotta connect. Yeah, you gotta get me his info. I heard that.
Well, what it does make me think of, though, is the opposite of that, is how do we get better when we're traumatized and re-traumatized every time we step foot in the in a medical office?
Yeah.
Like when you've been laughed at or told you're crazy, or it's all, it's all in your head and you can hardly, it's like, it's just trying to put all this together of how you go from one thing to the next and then truly enter into wellness if the people making you well are also. It's like being in an abusive relationship but you're tied to all the time.
So what I would say there is, why does your brain keep taking you into an abusive relationship?
Yeah, well,
Work on yourself.
they got the
and
tests,
you,
right?
100%. Just work on if you're feeling trauma, work on it, because it's probably affecting a lot of things, right? And then I had a really bad relationship with myself. For I started learning about myself and about my development, and I had a really bad relationship with myself. I didn't love myself, and it was a lot to do with my limbic system. Was like, dude, like, no, you suck. It's the internal dialogue, and so what happens? I attract people that don't help me, and they reinforce that until I get it, fix it. Now I attract people that help. So,
There's a lot of A-type personalities in Lyme.
yeah.
And you can I can just hear all that clicking,
The
like
perfectionism.
do for others, do more, do better,
There's a great book by Marion Woodman called Addiction to Perfection.
Oh.
And there's a movie she did called Dancing in the Flames. All of our type A's, especially women, we make you watch Dancing in the Flames when you do neurofeedback.
Where is that on? Where is that?
Dancing in the Flames. You have to look it up. I do if you can get it from Amazon. Thank you, Emma. And if you guys want, like, we have extra copies. We could always borrow you too.
Oh well, that's very nice offer.
Lend to you.
Yeah.
Word retrieval's going offline here. So yeah, no, but that's a great point. right? Because why the heck do we keep re-traumatizing ourselves, right?
Well, we do what we know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or what we feel.
It's
Yeah.
habitual.
Yep.
Exactly.
Yeah. So.
Exactly. That's the lower brain